Hello everyone, I'm Noctis Corvus, but you can call me Noctis. And before all else that I usually would say, wow, did my last one of these get a load of support. I mean, it's the first video of mine to hit 100 views in less than 24 hours, and I did not expect that to happen for some time yet, or at all. Now, I originally planned for a second one of these to be posted at the end of the month. A sort of opening and closer, if you will, to sort of acknowledge what is represented here. And that was mainly since I wasn't sure how this would be received. Yet, people said that they enjoyed it, and I did have a spare week in my plans. So, here we go. This week, I'm giving you Pride Flags as Art, Part 2. This week will feature the bisexual flag, a romantic flag, and the non-binary flag, with the same sort of rules as last time. Those mainly being things like the colour palette will primarily be the colours of the Pride flag, and I won't be introducing any other base colours to what I'm working with. The only exception to this is the shading phase, where I can use whatever I think I need to, just until the image is done. However, where possible, I will be trying to use the other colours for this stage too. Though, this time I don't think I managed quite as much of it as I did last time, but the effort was there and I did try. But without further ado, that is all I really have to say here, so let's just get straight into it with the flag you've been watching in the background. The first up is the non-binary flag. This is a gender identity that refers to anyone who identifies as beyond the gender binary, just as the name sort of implies. See, the idea of a gender binary is typically referring to the thought that there are two strict genders only, those being male and female. So this gender identity refers to anyone who is comfortable outside of this, in whatever way they feel the most comfortable thinking of it. For example, a non-binary person may feel that they are between male and female, but don't fit comfortably into either category. Another may feel that they lack any sense of gender altogether, and another may feel that they partially identify with aspects of one gender, yet aren't entirely comfortable within it. And I do hope this makes at least some bit of sense. But it's really another umbrella term, overall, and one that widely captures simply not fitting into the binary idea that people traditionally think of when referring to gender. Some of my given examples would be considered to fit smaller, more specific labels, yet they all would fall under the non-binary category. But with that said, let's look at the flag and its history for a moment. See, the history of this flag was something I struggled to find much about. Yet what I did find is that it was designed in 2014 by Kay Rowan to sort of coexist with the genderqueer flag that had already been around at that point. It was made for people who didn't feel that they were represented in the other flag, but also could be used together. The yellow of the flag is meant to represent people whose gender doesn't conform to the binary idea of it, or doesn't refer to it. The white then represents people with multiple genders, this referring to a range of other identities, such as gender fluid as one example. The purple in the flag then refers to people whose gender is a mix of the traditional binary. And, finally, the black then refers to people who don't have a gender identity and would rather identify as lacking a gender. So then, why did I exactly include it here? Well, it seemed to fit with the rest of the flags that I'm exploring today, and it is a term that I've heard more commonly than some of the other labels that I could have explored. It felt fitting, almost, to sort of address the other major umbrella terms that I've seen around, just before going into the labels under it. Though I also wanted to include this flag for myself to a degree. I haven't really said much about this to many people, but for a while I did identify with this flag before deciding that I didn't really want to label it just yet. In some ways I would potentially still fall under this term, though I haven't felt much need to pin it down exactly how or look into it further, as I am happy at the moment. Maybe later I will want to explore that again, but there isn't much rush at the moment. I am happy as a she-they, and that is that. But this previous connection did sort of implicate a kind of bias, like in the previous videos. It wasn't much of one, I will admit that much, but it was some, just to sort of acknowledge the past in a degree. It also didn't really help that this colour palette is something I could just naturally decide to use, maybe just with a few more colours included than I had here, as the non-binary flag contains the usual components I opt to work with in quite a few pieces of art, just in various shades and a little bit brighter than I normally choose. Purple is my favourite colour, and the yellow complements that, and it just meant that it was a really appealing flag to work with. But with all of that said, let's look at the video itself and the drawing here with what is left of this section. After all, I had two options for this flag in particular, and the outcome could have been very different if I had continued down the other route. I almost made it a desert environment, and that it was inspired by the yellow in the flag, and I had other options for the tones across the piece. Maybe a night sky over some sand dunes, or a town in the desert against the night sky. I wanted to look at it, and a few sketches did consider these ideas and these threads for quite some time. It was only really when I began sketching these digitally for this set that I went back and regenerated some other options, just as it wasn't quite coming together as I had hoped, or as I wanted. And I eventually settled on the idea of a crystal cave. It checked all of the boxes really, and it let me incorporate the grey and other tones in the flag in a way that was a little bit more harmonious than in earlier sketches. Besides, just as I did in the last set, I wanted to have each image hold some sort of tie back to nature and the natural world to keep them all semi-connected as a whole set. It was also a strong theme to tie into each of these works that I wanted to keep it going. And I most certainly will. I already have ideas for the final set of this month, and they include this tie as well. Yet, back on topic. The cave was a way to include this tie and bring together all of the colours that I had to work with, and it sort of let me explore better ways to tie it all together. I mean, before this, the desert had only included the white as stars and the moon. The grey was the sky. It left a very vibrant yellow and purple for everything else. That just wasn't exactly coming together in the way that I had intended. Changing routes sorted this entirely, and it clicked into place with very few challenges from there. But beyond that, the crystal idea stuck out to me more than my other options were the colours that I had to work with. I mean, this flag is somewhat nicer than most of the other Pride flags out there when it comes to an art palette. Nothing against those other flags by that, but the purple and yellow are factors I'm more familiar with when it comes to using them in a piece. Then it gave me a lovely darker contrast that wasn't pure black, so I could shade it and add texture to it where I needed to. The white was actually the hardest part for me to work out in all of this. See, it's the same as every other pure white in any of the other flags, so it is a problem I knew to expect almost. It's one I'm growing familiar with the more that I do this. Yet shading the white could be quite challenging, and I definitely wasn't sure how I would include it in the cave scene. It wouldn't be stars, and I felt that I almost had to take a risk with it given the layout so far. I had planned to include some sort of moss or plants amongst the cave, and I had sketched multiple patches of it, so when it came to colours and the flats, I had white left that may have worked with it. Would it have necessarily been my first choice? Not really in any sense of it, but I tried it with the intent that I could change it later if needed. Maybe switch a crystal colour with it in case it would look better yellow or purple for the plants. And in the end, I actually shaded the white plants fairly early, at least in the basic sense of that. I will detail them a lot more later, but I had to kind of see before I committed too far to these colours if I would want to keep them like this, or if I would need to rejig the entire thing. I did always know that I may change them later, maybe even after I shaded everything else, but I wanted to see it sooner rather than later, just so I had an idea with what I was working with. And quite simply, it actually worked out with the grey in the piece, and I ended up loving how it came together. So even then, the white in the palette didn't give me too much trouble. Not as much as it could have. I would actually dare to say that it was the easiest palette of the video, so we're certainly starting off well here. But with the time left before we move on, I want to talk about some of the other little details across the piece. The first of these are the crystals, which is sort of what I built the idea around after all. I mean, I knew the purple and yellow were very vibrant, and that, yes, they would complement each other, but they would also draw a lot of attention if they weren't properly balanced, or if they were overused in the piece. Basically meaning that I didn't want to make them 90% of the work compared to everything else, as they'd otherwise take too much attention away from the overall thing, and I'd have to be careful with how I used them. I would say, though, that I found a nice sense of that balance, though they are the majority of everything. I did go with a simpler composition. I had one sketch where it was far more detailed, though, and that one fell apart when it came to adding colour, as they just conflicted and battled too much, and things overlapped. So there was no way that I would be able to do that without introducing more colours to the basic palette, and that is one of my rules for things to avoid. But with this one, its simpler layout let me push more with the colours of it all. It let me take that risk of using the purple as a background, and including the yellow as some sort of mist almost, before tying them again into the crystals. Ironically, I think the white helped it all in this sense. I mean, it makes it all brighter and draws the eye around the piece, so it still gives a sense of the environment to it all, and ties in well with the crystals and the lighting in them. Besides, shading the crystals had been fun once I worked out a process to it all. They were a little bit of back and forth in the beginning, a bit of a headache to properly work out, but I eventually found a flow with it all. You may see it, but I did one of the yellow crystals and actually took a break after doing it, since I had something to go and do for a minute or two. Coming back after those moments, though, meant that I had forgotten exactly how I had just done that crystal, and it meant I was back to square one and working it out again. This time I instead worked on multiple at once though, so I didn't repeat that certain mishap. And yes, they ended up a little bit different, but it worked out in the end, as I have said, and the lighting on every single one of the crystals just had been so much fun to work on and develop, and it really tied everything together and made the scene a lot brighter than a dull cave. And I really didn't want this thing to come across as dull or in any way like claustrophobic or small. I wanted it to feel open and bright, which the crystals definitely helped with. Besides, this piece has also given me sketches for more detailed crystal caves that I want to explore further at some point when chance allows me to do so. So whilst this is rather direct in its composition, I may be repeating the idea in a way in the future, just to sort of see what I can do with it when I'm not on a limited palette, and that should be fun to look at. And just finally here, with the time left, I wanted to mention the white dots around the page and the little glows that I added to them. That had begun as my tie to the white in the palette and that stripe of the flag, something included that I love to draw on any given day, and I include in quite a few pieces. But it could also be a quite strenuous tie to the palette at best. It just didn't do the job that it was meant to do, and it felt like the easy way out. Though the lights were cute and they came to blend in with the white plants and the leaves around this piece. Those details finally actually being the white detail, as I've kind of already touched on. So, with these together though, I felt that they could stay, even once I had the more established presence of white in it all, as it just kind of added to the overall effect, and it was subtle enough that it didn't take away from anything. It is hard to say exactly how the final outcome looks, only because I'm the one who drew it, but it's bright, which was a main goal of mine, and it's something almost meant to look a little bit magic, with these floating lights and some of the leaf detailings that I added that ended up standing out across it all. But either way, I had fun with this one, and the lights adding that little magical touch had been entirely unplanned, yet so fun for me to see at the end that they were going to stay. But that does wrap up this section of the video, so let's move on quite swiftly, shall we? Next up, we have the bisexual flag. Bisexual refers to someone who feels attraction for more than one gender, however they may experience that. One person who is bisexual may be attracted to other genders in equal amounts. Others may have preferences, meaning they are more likely to be attracted to one gender than others, yet they would still be attracted to the others as well. A common misconception here, though, is that bisexual only refers to two genders, male and female, Yet that is, as I've said, a misconception, since it does refer to all genders. So why don't we look at the flag itself now? It was created in 1998, around December 5th, by Michael Page. From what I can find, he based it off of the common symbols for bi groups at the time, pink and blue overlapping crescents or triangles, and he used this then to form the flag. The goal of the flag at the time was then to give the bisexual community a recognisable symbol and flag that then gave them something to be represented by, and to increase their visibility at the time. Based on what I can find, the pink refers to attraction of the same gender, blue referring to attraction of the opposite. The purple stripe in the middle is then representing attraction to multiple as well, as it's the mix of the two colours and where it overlaps. Now, with that summarised, why did I include this one in this week's video? There's a host of other flags that I could look at for this, so why this one exactly? And the answer to that is actually quite simple. I felt that this flag is one I see a fair amount, and it would be an interesting challenge for this set given the flag's palette. Away from that, I also felt that I just did the lesbian flag last week, so I wanted to look at something a little bit different rather than just switching it to the gay flag straight away. Don't get me wrong, that one will be looked at this month, but I just wanted to do the bi flag first. This one was also included here as the last video like this one got a request to include it, but that gave me the push to take this challenge. And by the way, when I say challenge, I mean from an art perspective purely. I will get into that in a moment here, but it didn't really deter me much from working with the flag. I'm actually glad I got to add another one of these this month so that I could look at this flag and just address more identities that I otherwise wouldn't get around to this month. But with all of that said, let's turn attention towards the art at this stage. The development of this one ended up a little bit simpler than the others. I didn't have any last minute major changes at least, but it did give me a bit more trouble when doing the colours for it, and in the earlier beginning stages. I mean, I usually begin generating these ideas based on the colours of the flag and seeing what I associate to it before all else. For example of this, the ace flag of last video. That one got space and stargazing, as I commonly connect those to the colours of the flag. This one was a little bit different. I didn't really look at these colours and immediately have that connection for something else that I do with others. It was harder to come up with that starting point because of this, just until I sort of worked out everything else for the other sets. I mean, to a degree, it reminds me somewhat of water, with the blue, and I could have done an image with the bottom half like the water, except when I was looking for inspiration, I did see a picture similar to it, and I kind of knew I had just been thinking of that since I've seen it before. So I put that idea to the side as I felt that I needed to do my own thing with it. Instead, I let myself take a break and look at other options for the rest of the flags, both for this week and for the final week of this month. I sort of had them come first and looked at what I could do to ensure that they were unique and had the environments I associate with them included in the work. It just made a little more sense to take that step back and see what spaces were left with what I could do and what would work in this palette. And in the end, the waterfall idea sort of stuck the more that I went with it. I threw it out onto a page halfway through the process of everything else as an idea, and it was one that I could go back to and reflect on once I was sure of everything else. And from there it just sort of stuck with what I needed from it. Besides, it included the water with the blue and presented an interesting challenge for everything else I would come to look at and include. It is worth noting here that I hadn't been considering anything about colour when looking at the layout, or the initial idea. I didn't want it to really hinder me in any form or sort of deter me into making it something else. Something simpler that may be a bit easier to approach with the colours I had. But either way, it meant I had a starting point, and that eventually, via sketching, worked its way into what you're watching now. Now, this is where I move into discussing the colour palette, and how ignoring the colours when sketching the composition sort of came back to haunt me a little bit. I did test the colours before committing to the flat stage. You would have seen it in any early phases of the base colours. Yet with this one at least, I sort of just accepted that I wouldn't really be able to tell if I liked it or not until it came to shading the piece, or even until it was nearly done. See, the flag looks lovely, do not get me wrong. The colours work well together and they're in a good ratio. Taking them into a sole palette of an art piece, though, kind of brings about their own challenges with how vibrant each of them are on their own, and together. And again, this is nothing against the flag. Each one so far has given me a unique challenge in some form, but I simply never realised how bold these colours can be until I actually came to using them for an entire artwork, as dumb as that may sound. I know each of the flags are bright and bold, there being a reason for that, so I don't know why I didn't realise it before going into these, that these 3 colours being my only option could get a little challenging. Regardless of this though, I do like to think that I made it work. It was something I really didn't know until shading and balancing it all out, but now I do think that it works surprisingly well, considering that I don't usually choose many of these colours either. I always tend to opt for darker blue or a purple, and it's actually quite rare that I will use a pink, especially one this bold. If I do, it's darker or as a shading tone for something else. So to have this piece made up of really, really bold colours, I am rather proud of making it work. And I know I have said it, but I hadn't been sure it would work for the longest time, longer than normal for most of my pieces. During one break that I took after finishing the non-binary image, I did actually consider changing the bisexual image entirely, or scrapping it and starting over with a new idea. And I very almost nearly did do that. I think the main reason I didn't was because I wanted to try and shade it to see if I would like it and to see if it would work as I had hoped. Thankfully though, that side of my thoughts won out and here we are. A very bold waterfall and a very vibrant surroundings. And on that note though, let's look at some of the details in the piece, shall we? I haven't touched on any of them like I usually would, and it feels strange to just ignore them. And we do have a fair bit of time before we move on to the next one, so it only makes sense to discuss these bits a bit further. The first of these, before I go back and talk about the waterfall, is the rocks and the stone in the image. See, I knew I wanted a waterfall, and it sort of meant, for a simpler layout, I would need to include a sort of rock or cliff for it to be embedded in. I mean, I could have done a small one or a slower one along more of a casual rock formation, something a bit less dramatic than this. Yet with the colours at hand, I highly doubted I would have been able to work out the colours for it, and I do want these to all be fairly simple. So, in saying that, I had pink or lavender left. The lavender is a good middle tone, all things considered, especially considering the flag layout. It was also something I thought would work better in places like the grass and leaves, just so that I could almost sort of lean into the vibrancy elsewhere. So I tested and made the rocks the bright pink. And I will admit, this was partially the main thing in the drawing that I was the most uncertain about, especially before I started working back into it. It was so bright when I came back to it that I did consider switching the pink and the lavender. Yet when I tried it off camera, it was just a bit too much. It was just a little bit too bright and the image's focal point was really all over the place, as the blue and the pink combated to be the brightest point and the main detail. The eye really didn't have anything to focus on with it. So pushing the pink back almost and using it to frame the other parts just worked out a little bit more in my favour, especially after I'd finished shading and adding all the details to it. I also did allow myself to introduce darker tones for the shading too. Doing my usual of trying to only use the flag would have created an outcome I would like a lot less, and this isn't really meant to be the core of this week's video or the challenge. Maybe in the future I will do the typical challenges, like limited colour palettes, but for this week it is making a satisfying outcome where the base palette is the featured pride flag. Things like shading aren't really breaking my own rules either, as they aren't considered as the main palette. It also made the outcome actually work in cases like this. Away from all of this though, I surprised myself with how much I liked the way the rocks turned out. I think I can confidently say that I've never used this colour before for something like this, or really at all now that I think about it, and I doubt that I've really ever used one this bright for anything close to rocks. So, all in all, it was a unique challenge that I don't face often, and I can't really see myself facing it too often in the future either. It then ties a little bit into the next detail though as well. The rocks had to work with the waterfall, after all, without taking anything away from it or coming to overpower it. Naturally, these two sections overlap, as it's meant to be a waterfall embedded in some rocks. Yet when it came to shading the water too, it's something I normally struggle with, just when drawing normally. For some reason, no matter how many times I do it, I always forget how to do water, or work out how it looks, or just how it would behave in general. This time was a little bit easier though, mainly since I wasn't making the water translucent or anything, or having anything below it, but it still took me a moment to work out how it was shaded, and how it would complement the rocks, even. From there it quickly became my favourite detail in the piece though. It was subtle enough that I actually forgot how vibrant the blue is, and the shading tied it well into everything else. And that is something that I didn't really expect either. I just sort of started working on this piece with the idea that I may have to change the entire idea, and this meant that I let myself experiment with the light in the water as well, and almost push how far I could go with something like this, just without taking away the original colour of it as well. And this, strangely enough, ties into the final detail that I want to address. And I do know that I'm moving somewhat quickly here, and things kind of blend and merge together, but everything in this piece is kind of tied together, and that's one of the reasons I love it so much. I can't really talk about one thing without moving into the next, and that blending into the final bit. So just forgive me if it blends all together, as the details and the processes of this were all kind of one major thing. Yet for this bit, and the detail in particular, I will be going back to the sketching phase, just where I've been plotting out colours to begin with. See, at that point, I had the trees sketched in and I didn't really know which colour I would be doing them in, and I had 3 options. I half considered making them pink as well and just shading it to have them stand out in some way, but that quickly changed, and I mean like almost immediately, as I didn't want to have to shade the trees incorrectly or have them stand out too much, just to get them to be visibly 2 different things. See, the balance of the pink and blue in that one also hadn't been quite right, and that was mainly because I'd been keeping the blue to the water. So I made it the trees and added in flowers and all of that around it, as I knew that the trees at least wouldn't really overlap each other or the other details of this colour anyway, and all of it just worked together to balance it that little bit better than the other versions had been. And with those established, it definitely sort of helped when the waterfall came together, just since it meant that I could focus on the other aspects of it, as the colours alone were more balanced on the entire piece without it being too out of proportion or overly dominated by one colour in particular. If anything, the lavender took most of the piece, and this isn't something I've really commented on. Though I will say that the lavender was a little bit more intended than the other ones were. I almost wanted it to overlap the 2 colours in as many places as I could get away with it doing that, like the rocks at the front or the grass between the trees and the stone. It was a little detail that I chose to include, and it did also help to visually tone down the vibrancy of the other 2 colours, the more that I came to include it. And that was entirely planned but also semi-accidental. The toning down bit is something that I didn't really expect would happen, but I did plan where to put it. And all of these details came together as I intended. It was a simple start and a rocky middle, but I really doubt I would change much about the outcome now, as I am glad I chose to stay with these ideas. It was also refreshing in a way, the flag making me use colours I would normally avoid or simply not think of, especially not for details as key as these, and they'd more commonly be supporting pieces or little highlights here and there. And as much as I have spoken about it, the challenges of working with this flag and these colours weren't the only ones to give me these challenges out of the entire set. To compare it to any, they were fairly simple to the challenges of the trans flag, where the colours in that were bright and vibrant, but looked very pastel when together, and I didn't really have a darker tone to contrast that piece with. It only really differed as these were more bold before anything else. I also doubt that this will be the last flag to give me an art challenge as well. But that does wrap up this flag, so maybe we should look at moving on. And last, but by no means least, we have the aromantic flag. Now, aromantic refers to a person who feels little to no romantic attraction to other people. Like many other things, this is a spectrum as well, and an umbrella term that many other labels would come under. A person may feel no romantic attraction at all, under any circumstances, or they may only develop them in very specific situations depending on the person. So I just want to preface this here and say that I will be moving a little quickly here, since this is our shortest section of the video. Mainly because I didn't really have too many challenges with this piece once I had worked out which colour went where and layout and stuff like that I will touch on later. But this flag had been a bit of a challenge to find the history of it, but I did manage to find a few things here and there. Mainly that this version of the flag is from 2014 and was created on Tumblr by a user called Cameron Whimsy. The green was chosen as it's the inverted colour to red, which is usually associated with romantic love. They then used 2 tones of it to represent the spectrum that aromanticism is. The white then represents platonic and aesthetic attraction, as the grey represents grey romantics and demi-romantics. Finally, the black represents the sexuality spectrum. To also quickly clarify here, grey romantics are part of the spectrum and they're people who feel weak romantic attraction or infrequent romantic attraction. Demi-romantics are then people who feel romantic connections after a strong bond is already made, just to kind of define what those 2 things mean. So I also think we've recognised a pattern by now, as I quickly want to explain why I have included it in the video and here. The main reason for this is simply because I did asexuality last week, and it felt right to include this flag here. It's an umbrella term like many of the other ones I've looked at already, and all of the ones in this video. So it is an interesting identity to look into, especially with things of how ingrained romantic attraction may be that people just assume it's a thing. Besides, seeing the flag gave me an idea almost right away, as it's another I commonly associate with certain environments. So, moving into ideas, I always associate this one with forests and those sorts of spaces. I don't even know why I really make this connection. If anything, I would say it's simply because the green elements are on top of everything else. And that really cements this association in my mind, somehow. It's like the barest of connections, the teeniest of links, yet for some reason, it's something I can never really ignore about this flag. So unlike the others in this video, this environment was basically set in stone from the moment I decided it would be in these videos. I had to work out what the forest would look like, and to some degree what would be going on inside of it, but I knew that it would be a forest. And I have had this really simple idea for some time now. I really love how fallen trees look, and I really wanted to include a degree of this one in here. For a while I considered adding a person, since I sort of realised at this stage that I hadn't included any of them in this video, just unlike last time. Yet decided that ultimately it wasn't needed, as it wouldn't have added anything to this piece anyway. It would have only meant adding more colours or mixing the colours of the flags to try and come up with something that I could then use for the person. And the composition had already come together in a way that I was satisfied with. The only part of this drawing that had given me any sort of challenge had been working out how the colours would be used together. In one version, the grass was grey and the front trees were black. The background was white, and then the back trees were the greens. This one was just a little bit too incoherent though, and it was far less coherent than this one. So it was more something that I just kind of toyed with, as I tried multiple different avenues before even coming to settle on this one. I think in the end I actually ended up trying every other option before I settled on this one too. But in the end, that is sort of just how these things go sometimes. Every now and then I can get it right the first time, but more often than not I will need a few changes here and there, and many drafts of the colours alone before I come to settle on a specific outcome and a specific way of doing the flats. This is almost why I've changed my routine a bit more as of late, to include that stage in the shading, but I will likely pick up on that point in another video, where I have a bit more time to discuss it than I do here. So let's just move on to the details of this piece. They are kind of few and far between, but they are still present, and they are definitely things I want to address before we wrap up. The main detail of it all had been the experiments I used to complete the details on the trees, and just to explore the texture of everything since I didn't want to over-detail it in any way. This layout would look better with simple shading, so drawing every single leaf wouldn't have made sense in some areas. This did mean trialling something new as I went, and it actually gave me a lot less hassle than it normally would. See, I began by using a dry brush to sort of imply sections of tone on the back bushes, just as I needed before going over it with a lower opacity textured pencil that then created the scattered dotted look that I needed to imply the leaves being viewed from a distance in the forest. It was then that I went in and added some leaf shapes coming off of the overall form, but not on it, just to simply imply that there was some coming loose and maybe falling off, just so it sells that the thing above it is leaves once more. It also added a bit of visual interest to the area and broke up the shape a little bit. It's a new process I then used all over this piece, as it set it apart from the others in that sense, and it made it as simple as I wanted it to be. Doing it this way meant that there were fewer sections of detailed leaves vying for attention, as I've done in other pieces, especially in other ones that I've done since I've developed that technique to begin with. This one just needed something different though. With the darker colours, I didn't imagine it detailed like everything else. I instead wanted it as implications and texture so that the basic tones ended up shining through, and almost remaining basically the same. It then let me play an experiment, which was fun. The front spaces have the details anyway, but even then I toned it down compared to what I normally would do, since going too far would set it apart from the rest of the image in this case. If anything, it helps it stand out a little bit more. The fallen tree is the focal point, and it's the centre that really seems to matter, with this being where most of the detail is focused. The grey stuff on it is meant to be moss, so I didn't add leaves and these sorts of accents. I instead favoured using lines on it to sell the wanted impression without taking it too far or making it a bushy plant instead, and it did end up very subtle, yet exactly as I had intended for it, as this isn't overpowering in any way. Of it all, the only colour I didn't really tie into it too much was the white. The forest ended up quite dark, and it built up this idea for an atmosphere that I do tend to return to over and over again. I know I frame a lot of things with trees then. I have done in this video a few times. It's something I will eventually stop liking so much, but for now it's a detail that I enjoy. It makes sense to me as a natural frame, which aids this image. But the white would have been a little bit too much. It made it a gradient in the background, and that was subtle and a nod to include it. I mean, I couldn't just ignore an entire colour of the flag for no reason, and even if I had some semblance of a reason, I just still couldn't ignore it. Yet it ended up as something that worked in a subtle mist in the background or a fog in the horizon, rather than trying to pull it towards the front. To make up for this, I did include little nods of it in the shading and the lighting, and it is still noticeable in all of it, which is why I really don't mind this choice. Besides, this mist then let me add a little more detail into the background than I would have been otherwise able to get away with. I know the black in the middle is quite a bold choice, but I didn't want it to be the background, as it then would have been harder for me to tie anything else into it. And it also would have been quite stark compared to everything else. This meant the grey doubled as the background with the mist. Yes, it also meant that I could merge the white further up, just to add in more faint and distant trees to the piece with the original grey, and it wouldn't look out of place and it also wouldn't blend in too much. By merging the white, it kind of made the grey look a bit lighter, so when I went back into it with the grey, it just looked that little bit different and it didn't stand out too much, so it made a really nice subtle effect. And as I may have already said, nothing was too out of place when I did this. Think of it as what I did on the non-binary image for the rock pillars further back, though I never really commented on it in that stage. But the subtlety of that added that little bit more to the image, and it really made it all feel so much more completed when it came to look at the outcome. Not doing it would have made it seem flat, and it didn't take me too long to include, so it is a detail I came to love. And really, at this stage, I can't imagine the image without it anymore. Now, this is actually shorter than I thought it would be, so I will sort of wrap up this piece here. After all, it gave me very few issues, and its challenges were basically nothing once I had worked out the layout and the values of the colours that I needed to include. Compared to others, it had actually been my most straightforward image for this video, no matter what I sort of assumed going into it. But it was still fun, and the outcome is one that I wouldn't change. Besides, it gave me new ideas for shading methods that I can try another time, so what isn't there to love there? But that brings us to the end of this week's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed it either way. Just a quick update here before I go. The prints of the last Pride video are available on my Etsy, which is always linked below in the description. Those, for context, are the trans, ace and lesbian prints. This week's prints will be made available as soon as I can, for the duration of Pride and a few months after. Just to be transparent here, I ran out of an ink colour that the prints need, and I don't have a backup of it to hand, so they're a little bit delayed. As soon as that changes, I will absolutely list them as well, and they'll be available again for a few months after Pride. In saying that though, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all next time, so have a wonderful week, and goodbye.